যে আনিল প্রেম ধন করুণা প্রচুর। যে আনিল প্রেম ধন করুণা প্রচুর। হেন প্রভু কোথা গেলা আচার্য ঠাকুর। কাহা মোর স্বরূপ রূপ কাহা সনাতন। কাহা মোর স্বরূপ রূপ কাহা সনাতন। কাহা দাস রঘুনাথ পতিত পাবন। কাহা দাস রঘুনাথ পতিত পাবন। কাহা মোর ভট্ট যুগ কাহা কবিরাজ। কাহা মোর ভট্ট যুগ কাহা কবিরাজ। এক কালে কোথা গেলা গোরা নটরাজ। এক কালে কোথা গেলা গোরা নটরাজ। পাষাণে কুটিব মাথা অনা পশিব পাষাণে কুটিব মাথা অনলে পশিব গৌরাঙ্গ গুণের নিধে কোথা গেলে পাব সেসব সঙ্গীর সঙ্গে যে কইল বিলাস সেসব সঙ্গীর সঙ্গে যে কইল বিলাস সে সঙ্গ না পাইয়া কাঁদে নরোত্তম দাস সে সঙ্গ না পাইয়া কাঁদে নরোত্তম দাস জয় বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর জয় বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর জয় ব্রহ্মানন্দ প্রভু জয় বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর ব্রহ্মানন্দ প্রভু জয় বৈষ্ণব ঠাকুর জয় জয় প্রভুপাদ 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 জয় জয় প্রভুপাদ জয় জয় প্রভুপাদ 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 জয় জয় প্রভুপাদ নিতাই গৌর হরি বল হরি বল হরি বল নিতাই গৌর হরি বল
Asatara Satasi Simad His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajakacharya Asatara Satasi Simad His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopanashai Makund Radha Kund Gir Govardhana Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. His Grace Brahmananda Prabhu Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. We'd like to welcome everyone coming here today for Disappearance Day of Brahmananda Prabhu. I'm sure everyone here knows him, one degree or another, everything he's done over the years for Srila Prabhupada. Of course, we have his brother here, Gargamuni Prabhu, who's going to be showing us so much that he's collected. Of course, his two brothers I've seen no more dear to each other than these two have been through their lives. And I'm sure that carries on to this day. So I won't say much other than I'm turning this over to Gargamuni Prabhu. Him and I, we spent some time together in Hawaii way back around 1979, 1978. He was, even there in Hawaii, he had developed a business. Sumeru Mountain was the wholesale distributor of Lealdoha candles. We have a candle in Prabhupada's bedroom that came from those businesses. It's still there. It's leaning over now from the heat. But at that time he was supporting the Hawaii temple while he was there. I remember that.
Hare Krishna. You're talking about Brahmananda being there or me?
Hold the mic to your mouth.
Well, today we talk about Brahmananda. And I like to say for the first time that Brahmananda made many devotees throughout the 11 years that he was with Prabhupada. But specifically, I was the first. I was the first saved because I was a student for 3 days at a business college in New Mexico or Colorado, Grand Junction, you know? Yeah, Grand Junction, Colorado. I was going to business school, and all of a sudden I arrived there, and that night I had some kind of spiritual realization. I don't want to do this. And I had heard about the gathering of the tribes in San Francisco, the hippies. Allen Ginsberg called the gathering of the tribes. So I called my brother. I told him I had a spiritual realization. I'm not going to do this. I'm going out to California. I sold all my stuff. And then Brahmananda told me, don't go. I met a Swamiji. If you're interested in spiritual life, then come back. Come back to New York. So at that time, one flight to New York from New Mexico, I went to Albuquerque, was $65. That's all I had. And I went to New York. That was 66. about 5 days before Radhastami in September. And Brahmananda got initiated on Radhastami. Yeah, in 1966. And I got initiated the following month in October. So Brahmananda I was the first one that he made me a devotee. So all glories for that. We served together in New York. I was trying to make money for the temple, and Brahmananda was trying to do the publishing. That was the major occupation for Brahmananda while he was with Prabhupada. He was in charge of ISKCON Press in Boston, and he used to commute from New York to Boston on weekends. It's only a 2-hour drive from New York to Boston. So these are the publications that Brahmananda was responsible for publishing. And the first was the record, the Hare Krishna record. You can see it. It's in the glass cabinet. Brahmananda arranged for that from Mr. Coleman. He called him online, and he sent that copy of the first record. So it was very interesting how that record. I need some water. I take these pills that make your mouth dry. So it's very interesting, the story, how the record got Macmillan to publish the Bhagavad Gita. And this story is very interesting, so I'd like to explain it. So Brahmananda was in charge of publishing the manuscript. The manuscript wasn't ready at that time, but Brahmananda would send one chapter to all the publishers in America, and no one was interested. So Prabhupada was trying to get it printed in India, he was thinking at that time. So first of all, it was in December, well actually it was in October, that a man called Mr. Coleman went to the Lower East Side, because that was where all the hippies were, the Lower East Side. And the rich hippies were on the West Side. And Prabhupada started his Sankirtan movement before ISKCON. On June 30th, he had the interview with the Village Voice. But before that, he was chanting in, what was the name of that park? Washington Square Park. And he chanted there, and from that chanting, the Village Voice came and gave him a very, how do you do this? Like this? So, the Village Voice, that was the second newspaper that printed Prabhupada, about Prabhupada. The first was in Butler, where he arrived first in 1965. So Prabhupada got the first photo was taken at that time, Prabhupada holding his Bhagavatam. So the second one was the Village Voice, which is very popular at that time. It was like an art type of newspaper. It came out weekly. So Mr. Coleman, he came to the Lower East Side and saw the kirtan, and he liked it. So he called. I used to weave in and out of the crowd and hand out flyers so they could come to the temple. So Mr. Coleman called the temple, and Brahmananda answered he would like to see Prabhupada. So an appointment was made. He came, and he suggested to Prabhupada that I could make a record of your chanting. But Prabhupada wasn't very much interested at that time, because he said that a record, you hear it, and then you go to another record and another record. But a book, you read. And he said that was more important. So, but Mr. Coleman said, but you can speak on the record. Oh. And Prabhupada said, I can speak? Oh, then I will do. And so there is the introduction to the Krishna consciousness is on that record. And so this was in December. So how would we have kirtan when we had no instruments? So one African man came to the temple with a big mridanga, very long, and you'd had to use blocks of wood to make it tight all around. It was a wooden mridanga. And Prabhupada practiced it on it, and we were shocked how he was playing that mridanga, because he never had a mridanga. He had a little bongo drum when he was in the park chanting. So that drum was used on the record. We asked the African man if the Swami could use it for a few days, and he agreed. So when Mr. Coleman made that record, how do you spread that record? So there was a radio station called WBAI, and it used to come on night at 12 o'clock. And they would have all kinds of guests on that. And their signal was on the Empire State Building. So it was a very high signal. And all the radio stations would go off at that time. So the reception was very good. In fact, people from South America could hear the show, and people from England or Europe could hear the show. It was started at 12 o'clock midnight. So I said to Brahmananda, I'm going to bring the record there and have them play it, because they had Bob Dylan on there, they had the Rolling Stones on there, they had Allen Ginsberg, they had all the leaders of the underground movement there, the hippies. So I went up there at 12 o'clock, about 11 o'clock, because I had to take a subway. And as soon as I opened the door of the studio, I got a whiff of the marijuana. They were all high on marijuana. And I got high just from the second smoke that was filling the room. I said, I have a chanting record. Could you play it? And they loved it. And they played the whole record for 6 hours over and over. And they were really getting into it. And so there was many correspondence to the studio because we announced how much it was. It was only $3. Plus shipping was 50 cents. It was very cheap in those days. And he mentioned on the radio where he could get it at ISKCON, 22nd Ave, or send your request to the studio, WBAI in New York City. So about 2 weeks later, we get this whole box full of, requests, and they gave checks or cash in the envelope. And one letter came with Macmillan letterhead. So Brahmananda really opened that up right away and looked at it, and it was from an accountant who worked at Macmillan. So Brahmananda went to Prabhupada's room and showed him the letter, and Prabhupada said, "Oh, you go there. You don't ship the record, you bring it." And Brahmananda said, "But why? He's simple accountant. He has nothing to do with the publishing." And Prabhupada said, "No, you will see what will happen, but you go there and bring it." So Brahmananda went there, and this man was sitting in a tiny cubicle. It was a whole floor, it was a business. And this man was in a tiny cubicle with glass around. And he showed Brahmananda, showed the record. The man gave a check for $3. And all of a sudden, a man with a nice suit, tailored suit, came into the accountant's cubicle, because he saw this big man with bald head, with suspenders, sitting there, and who's this man? He wanted to know from the accountant. So he was introduced to Brahmananda and said, "I'm Mr. Wade. I'm in charge of publishing the Oriental Catalog for Macmillan." And Brahmananda said, "Well, I have a manuscript of Bhagavad Gita." And the man said, "You have what?" And Brahmananda said, "A manuscript for Bhagavad Gita." He said, "That's just what I'm looking for our catalog. Bring it in." So Brahmananda, that was it, in 66. It took a little time. They didn't want to print the 800-page Bhagavad Gita. So they printed, it's about 250 or 300 pages in paperback. And that came out in 1968. We got the first copies. We ordered a few boxes of them, and I put them in the stores before Macmillan did. I would put them in the stores. I put them in the stores before Macmillan did, in the bookstores in the Lower East Side and the West Side. Macmillan only charged us $1.60, and I charged $2. So this way the temple made some money. I was always trying to make money for Prabhupada. From Back to Godhead, I would go on the street at night to Broadway, where all the shows were. And I would go, "Get your program," because everybody was waiting outside to get their tickets. I said, "I got your program right here." And they were thinking it had to do with the show. but it wasn't. It was back to Godhead. So he gave me a quarter. I used to bring 30 or 40 copies, and I report back to Prabhupada and give the money directly to Prabhupada. So Prabhupada was very nice. He said, this is the first time his literatures were distributed in the USA. Was from Back to Godhead. We used to print those bi-weekly. So it was twice a month. Now it was every 6 months, I think. So that's how the Bhagavad Gita got printed. And then these others, the Bhagavad Gita got printed, then Krishna book came. Brahmananda he went to Japan because Prabhupada wanted the Krishna book for the Rath Yatra in San Francisco. And this was the first time there were 3 carts, Madhavya, organized to have 3 carts. Usually it was 1 cart. This time it was 3 carts. So Brahmananda was in charge of the Krishna's book, so he went to Japan for 1 month to have it ready. So Brahmananda sat there to have it, the first volume of Krishna book. And so Dainapan was saying that it's not possible to have it. It was only 3 months for printing. It takes about 6 months for printing. So Brahmananda sat there, kept nagging them, and they said, no, it won't be ready. And so Brahmananda got on the plane. He couldn't succeed in Prabhupada's order to have the Krishna book. So he was sitting on the plane, ready for takeoff. And all of a sudden, there's a whole bunch of commotion. And Brahmananda looked out the window, and there's 2 limousines coming. Right on to the terminal where the plane was sitting. And the stewardess got on the microphone, is there a Bruce Shaw Brahmananda here? He said, yes. These people wanted to see you. And they gave 1 carton of books to Brahmananda. And he was able to bring those back to Prabhupada for Rath Yatra. And he sold one to the man next to him. It was $20. He gave a donation. We were selling them for $8 in those days on Sankirtan. So Brahmananda brought back to Prabhupada, and they were also sold for Rath Yatra. Even Prabhupada's own copy was sold for Rath Yatra. So the next story is Prabhupada he used to use twigs. This is one of Prabhupada's twigs that Brahmananda said, because he was secretary for many times. In 73, 74, and 75. He was appointed in 74 as the permanent secretary. Prabhupada wanted a permanent secretary, but the GBC wanted to also come, and Prabhupada arranged for that. Each GBC would be with Prabhupada for 1 month. So Brahmananda saved this twig. He used the neem twig, but that was only found in India. But another twig was the eucalyptus tree. So they would ship them to Prabhupada all over the world, especially in New York. He was in New York. They would wrap it in tin foil and make a package of twigs. Because Prabhupada never used a toothbrush. He would always use a twig. The eucalyptus tree is antiseptic as well as the neem tree. You can pass it around. When Prabhupada would offer the prasadam in his apartment at 26 2nd Avenue, he would do the bells. We didn't know what arti was in those days. And so we would say, the Swami is using the bells. He used 2 bells, not 1 bell, 2 bells to offer the prasadam. We used to sit in Prabhupada's apartment in the living room, which is just a bare floor. Prabhupada would be sitting, and we'd be in a circle around Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said that we shouldn't touch our fingers to the mouth. And so that was very difficult because I never used to eat with my fingers in the first place. We didn't use spoons in those days, So even Prabhupada, his prasadam was on a platter. He would have a huge mountain of rice. He would use a mountain of rice with sabji on the side and chilies. He loved to eat chilies. It's antiseptic, it cleans the blood. In the dal, there were these black things. We called them sharks. They were the chance chilies. And if you ate those, you'd have to run to the bathroom and fill your mouth with water. So it was very difficult in those days we had to adjust to a new culture. And Prabhupada would watch us how we ate. He would watch each plate, and if there was some that was finished, he would say to Kirtananda, go give more, because Kirtananda was the one who would be serving. So I used to watch Prabhupada how he ate, and he would take rice and mix it with the sabji, and he would throw it from here into his mouth without touching his hands to his mouth. So I would try to do that and throw it, and it hit the wall behind me. Nobody could do the way Prabhupada did. So we would use our fingers and put them in our mouths. But it was very difficult to eat in those days, the way Prabhupada wanted us to eat. So Prabhupada wrote Brahmananda 220 letters. Many of them are not, I found 20 of them not even listed in the database. In 1967, that was the first time that Brahmananda got letters, because Prabhupada went back to India because of the heart stroke. That's an interesting story because it happened on Memorial Day weekend, the end of May. And what happened, there were 5 or 6 of us would be in the temple room, in the storefront, waiting for Prabhupada to come downstairs, like he always did. But that morning, he didn't come down. So we rushed up to his room, and he was lying flat. Prabhupada didn't have a bed. He sat and slept on the same place. He sat and slept on the same place where he didn't have a bed. So we saw Prabhupada laying on his back and not moving. He was just moving a little bit. He was paralyzed and blind in his left side. He had paralysis. So Brahmananda said, we didn't know what to do, but Brahmananda took leadership and tried to call doctors, his family doctor. They all went out of the city for Memorial Day weekend. You couldn't get a doctor anywhere. Brahmananda tried so hard. Finally, he did get a doctor, and the doctor came to examine Prabhupada. And when the doctor was finished, he came out of the apartment with Brahmananda and explained what was happening. So Brahmananda was listening. And Prabhupada was also listening in the storefront. So the man said, this old man, he prays too much. He should get out and walk. Do something. Not just sit all day in his room. He has to do some exercise. Get out. Stop preaching so much, So Prabhupada was influenced by that doctor, and that's how the daily morning walk started. He used to walk down to the East Side River, which is many blocks away, maybe a half hour of walking and a half hour of walking back. He'd also walk on the west side where the Hudson River was. You see. So that's how the daily morning walks started. So the other publishing Brahmananda did from ISKCON Press. He did Sri Ishupanishad. That came out around 1968, 69. The next was Nectar of Devotion. The TLC was printed, the first book printed by Dai Nippon. And that came out also in the winter of 68, along with the Bhagavad Gita. So we had both books. But we didn't know how to sell them. Prabhupada was trying to induce us to selling them through book distributors. There was no Harinam in those days. That started later in 68. And we were trying to sell magazines back to Godhead. It was very difficult to sell a book in those days. So, the Nectar of Devotion came out. These all came out at around 1968 and 69. So Prabhupada had literatures. Most of these, like Sri Upanishad, Nectar of Devotion, were printed by ISKCON Press, as well as the magazine. And he started, because the second canto of Bhagavatam was ready. So he wanted ISKCON Press in Boston to print chapter by chapter. And they were doing that. And they were very successful selling them on Sankirtan once they learned how to sell books. And that's how the second canto got printed by chapter. And that was printed by ISKCON Press. I don't have a copy to show you. I looked on the internet, I couldn't find any. So Brahmananda was in charge of publishing all of these literatures, plus being the president of New York Temple and doing Harinam, because Prabhupada wasn't around in 67, 68. In the summer, they would go to Tompkins Square Park, and Brahmananda would lead the kirtan there, at the same tree where Prabhupada used to sit. So practically the whole movement was being delegated by letters. Prabhupada would organize the printing of the books, but it was the letters that were made. I can't speak anymore. I have a nerve problem. Okay.
Okay, Abhiram Prabhu, you're next.
Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Brahmananda Prabhu. I came to the movement in 1969, and Brahmananda Prabhu, Gargamuni Prabhu were giants in the movement. They were really an encouragement to know that devotees had come earlier and that they were soldiering on and doing so many things. And in 1970, I was at the Janmashtami festival in New Vrindavan, and I just want to correct the record, because of course that was an amazing history where at that time some ideas were coming back from India, from the few devotees that were there, about maybe going to other gurus and minimizing Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada was deeply, deeply hurt by this, and even had threatened to leave us. I think he said, if you want to make me God, I'm ready to leave all of you, if you want to make me God. So the New Vrindavan festival, the four sannyasis were very famous at that time: Brahmananda, Gargamuni, Vishnujan, and Subal Maharaj were of course the key speakers. And Brahmananda, being so dedicated to Prabhupada at every level, and of course a very emotional and loving person, extremely emotional, loving person, he started lecturing us, and I was sitting about 6 feet in front, watching him speak. And the lecture went on so long that I remember Vishnu John and Brahmananda were standing up and rocking on their dundas because it was a long, long lecture. And the point of the lecture was to enlighten us as to the importance of Prabhupada. And of course, even Srila Prabhupada, I was just reading a letter, he said that Krishna is the worshipable God and Guru is the worshiping God, in Prabhupada's words. So Brahmananda Prabhu was making this point from the different scriptures that the pure devotee is the sum total of the demigods. He's, everything for the devotee. He was getting quite excited. And at some point he said, for us, he is God. In context, it sounded perfectly reasonable to me because I knew he wasn't promoting Mayavadi philosophy. He was emphasizing the importance of Guru. Along the same lines that I just quoted, where Prabhupada said Guru is worshiping the worshipper God. All right? So, after the festival, we all got in the van. I drove the four of them back to Detroit in the van. And they were in the temple president's room talking, and the phone rang. In those days, we only had one phone. It would be in the hallway, and there was no such thing as cell phones or anything like that. And the phone rang, and it was Shamsundar. And I answered, and he said, Prabhupada wants to talk to Bhagavan. Is he there? And I said, yeah, I got him. And Bhagavan came, and Prabhupada came in the line. I was standing 2 feet away, and Bhagavan did his obeisances. And here's what I heard. Yes, Prabhupada, they're here. Yes, Prabhupada. Yes, they said that. Somehow the rumor had got to Prabhupada that they called him God. And when he asked Bhagavan directly, Bhagavan did not purport it. I was standing right there. He said, yes, Prabhupada, they said that. Which was actually incorrect. It was actually incorrect.
Yes. That's mentioned in the Nectar group. We each had a book because we would discuss things. I had the Nectar of Devotion. Brahmananda had the Gita. Because we couldn't carry all the books with us, so we each had. Subal had, I think, Ishupanishad, and Vishnu John had the TLC, and somebody had Krishna book or something. That was a heavy book. So I don't think that anyone had that book. But I was because at that time. They're very much minimizing of Prabhupada. In LA, they put Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj painting was upside down. Then they put salt in the Trinamrita. And Prabhupada said, then there'll be poison maybe. He saw a gradually disrespect for the Acharya. On the letterhead, there was no founder Acharya on the letterhead. And even on the books, it just said A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. No founder Acharya, no ISKCON. So there was a minimization going on. In London, they had a Mayavadi sit on Prabhupada's Vyasasana and quoting from other gurus in those days. So there was so much going on. The Prabhupada got we were disrespectful. So we were trying to promote Prabhupada consciousness.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm
Big misunderstanding.
perhaps one of the few last living. Maybe some of you are, David Shakti was there. Do you recall it that way, David? Okay, okay. So I'll just finish that part. So to me it was quite clear, because we were already getting the news beforehand that Prabhupada was disturbed. And the class was perfectly clear to me. I didn't think that anything new had been introduced. So anyway, that message came to Prabhupada from, was in a sense not purported properly. And he said on that same phone call, then they must leave. The next morning I held the door and I was choking up. And I watched them go out with just one bag, those little cloth book bags, blanket over the shoulder, and a couple, like kartal, some extra underwear, extra dhoti, basically very little, a few books, and they walked out. And from that, of course, there was an explosion of preaching. So many temples were opened, and I'll leave that for, hopefully Gargamuni will tell us more. But, okay, and let Devi Shakti also, she has a vision of that.
Okay, so I interviewed Brahmananda about this. So we sat together, I recorded it for a long time, because in the Lilamrita, this whole incident was neglected. It wasn't dealt with. And so I asked Brahmananda, well, what really happened? What was the real story? So he said that in the beginning, there was some diminishing of Srila Prabhupada's position. And everyone got caught up in it, and it was coming from India, from Achyutananda, who had been hearing from Prabhupada's godbrothers and reporting back what the godbrothers were saying. And so they were minimizing Prabhupada. He wasn't as glorious as everyone was thinking, so that's what was happening. Yeah. So Prabhupada was being diminished. So Prabhupada at that point, he realized that he would have to take care of this situation. He called it a conspiracy. That's the term he used, a conspiracy. So then he decided that the four most prominent preachers in America, he would give them sannyas. And they would go out and travel and preach. So the four foremost preachers in America was Gargamuni, Brahmananda, Subal, and Vishnujan Swami. And so they took sannyas and they went traveling. They went to the East Coast, they went to Boston, and they toured all the temples, and then they came to New Vrindavan. And they were glorifying Prabhupada. So when I asked Brahmananda about that incident, he said, in the beginning, we kind of underemphasized Prabhupada, and then at New Vrindavan, we overemphasized Prabhupada. It wasn't anything malicious, or it wasn't anything Apasampradaya, but they were just trying to give Prabhupada back the glory that he deserved. So then, at the end of that festival, they all drove back to Detroit, and Bhagawan was the temple president there, and there was murmurings around the movement about that the four sannyasis had said that Prabhupada was God. So Bhagawan put them in a room, in a special nice room, but he locked the door. So they were trapped there. And then he called Prabhupada, and then who was in Japan. And then the secretary said, I think it was Tamal Krishna, okay, we'll let Prabhupada know. Then they waited, and then they got a call back from Japan. It was Prabhupada. And so, as we just heard, Bhagwan said, yes, they said you were God, so then Prabhupada said they have to leave. So they left the next morning, and they decided, well, we're sannyasis, what we're going to do. This is what Brahmananda told me. So we have to live a very austere life, so they decided to walk